Salvete discipuli. In this video, we will review how to tell the difference between an active verb and a deponent verb and how to translate their past participles accordingly. Okay, first we review the past participles of active verbs. Now, again, you know it's an active verb because when you look at this dictionary entry, the first item listed ends with an O, okay? And there are typically four principal parts when you have an active verb. The fourth of them is the past participle. Now, the past participle of an active verb, again, we know it's active because of that O. The past participle of an active verb is passive. So, visus means seen, having been seen. Here it is in a clause. Servus ab inimico visus ab eo fugit. The slave, seen by the enemy, fled from him. Okay, so now you can always add having been when you have a passive past participle of an active verb. Okay, notice, by the way, when the subject is a feminine, the past participle has to also be a feminine. So if it was ankila, it's going to be we saw, seen by the enemy. Now, we've also studied past participles which are, they're accusative because they are describing an accusative object. Okay, so here's an example. Quintus servum ab inimico visum salutavit. Quintus greeted the slave. Now the slave is further described as seen by the enemy. Remember that you could also render this as the slave who was seen by the enemy. All right, onward to deponent verbs. I've told you active verbs end in an O. But when you look at the dictionary form of a verb and it ends in OR, that means it's a deponent verb. Okay? So again, based on what I just told you, is mito an active verb or is it a deponent verb? You go, well, this is easy. He just told me if it ends with an O, as we have here, it's an active verb. And it is an active verb. And remember, the past participle of active verbs is passive, okay? So misus is going to be the passive past participle. Misus, sent, having been sent. If the verb is active, to send, misus is passive, having been sent. So now, apply that knowledge to this. First of all, you ask yourself, is neko an active verb or is it a deponent verb? Well, look, it ends with an O. That means it's an active verb. Now you ask yourself this question. How do I translate nekatus if nekatus, the fourth principal part, is the past participle of this active verb? Remember, the past participles of active verbs are passive. So if the verb means to kill, the past participle nekatos means killed, having been killed. Okay, let's look at another verb. Konor. Wait a minute. This doesn't end in an O. This ends in an OR. He told me that if it ends with an OR, it's deponent. Now, we're going to talk a little bit later about what that means for how we translate all the forms of the deponent. But remember, deponent verbs have an active past participle, okay? So if the verb means to try, the past participle konatus here means having tried, okay? Not having been tried. This is the distinction. Having been is passive. Having been is what you're going to see if the verb ends with an R. Having done something is an active past participle. That is what you'll have if the verb is deponent. And how do you know it's deponent? If it ends with an OR in that initial dictionary form. Here it is in a sentence. Quintus, comma, amicum videre conatus, comma, ad villam revenit. Quintus, having tried to see the friend, returned to the house. Okay, so having tried to do something, expressed, of course, by an infinitive, and the infinitive takes the direct object amicum. Okay, so let's look at another example. Again, if it ends with an OR, as you say, hortor ends with an OR, makes it a deponent verb. Not only do deponent verbs have active past participles, but an active past participle can take a direct object. So take a look at this. Hortatus, the active past participle. Now the verb means to urge, okay? But remember, it's active. It's not having been urged, okay? It's having urged. And it can take a direct object. So, amicum hortatus, having urged the friend. Let's look at another verb here. Okay, so remember, one of the skills we want to acquire is the ability to look at the dictionary entry of a verb and say, okay, if it ends with an O, it's active. If it ends with an OR, it's deponent. And to understand how to translate the past participles accordingly. Okay? Audio, audire, audive, auditus. Ends with an O, makes it active. Active verbs have passive past participle. And so Quintus ab amico auditus recit. Quintus, having been heard by the friend, smiled. Okay, so you wouldn't have to say having been. You could have just said Quintus, heard by the friend, smiled. Scribo, scribere, scripsi, scriptum, to write. Okay, so you take a moment all on your own. Think through for a moment. Is it active or is it passive? Now notice here, this is going to be like what we call a type 2 sentence. The past participle is actually kind of like an adjective describing this object here. Okay, it's active. Scriptam then means written, having been written. So, Quintus legit epistulam ab amico scriptam. Quintus read a letter written by a friend. Loquor, loqui, locutus, to speak. Think for a moment. Think for a moment. What is the significance of this? And what is the significance of that information on how I translate this form? Think it through. Okay, here's the answer. Quintus, having spoken these words, entered the house. So, haec verba is the direct object of the active past participle locutus because it is a deponent verb. Ingredior, ingredi, ingressus, to enter. Quintus, having entered the house, villam ingressus, vinum bibit, drank the wine. Paro, parare, paravi, paratus. Quintus praised the dinner prepared by the cook. Okay, so paratam, past participle, describing kenam, praised, having been prepared, having been prepared. So paratus, having been prepared or prepared. Now let's look a little bit at how we translate these verbs in like the imperfect tense between both active and possibly passive endings. So if paro parare means to prepare, parabant would mean they were preparing. But look what happens when I put this passive ending on parabant. Parabantur becomes they were being prepared. prepared, okay? So remember, active verbs can have passive endings, okay? So the normal ending of an active verb here, parabant, is active. They were preparing. It would take a direct object. But if you put a passive ending on, parabantur, now it is passive. They were being prepared. Here's why this is so important. Look at this verb loquor. You immediately know it's a deponent verb. Locutus means having spoken. But here's the thing. Deponent verbs don't have active forms at all. The only forms deponent verbs have are what look like passive endings. But here's the secret. They have passive endings, but still active meaning. So loquabantur, they were speaking. And this could even take a direct object. They were speaking words, okay? They were speaking a conversation, something like that. So again, an active verb can have active and passive endings. A deponent verb can only have passive endings, but translated actively. Okay, so mitto, mittere, misi, missus, to send. The past participle is translated having been sent, sent. Here's the active form of the imperfect. Mittebant, they were sending. What would it be in the passive? Not they were sending, but they were being sent. That's how you make that passive. Here's another one. Conor, conare, conatus, to try. Conatus means having tried. Conabantur. Okay, so there are no active endings here, only passive endings, and you translate this actively. They were trying. Hortor, hortari, hortatus. So hortatus, past participle, having urged. No active endings, only these passive endings. Hortabantur, they were urging. Video, videre, visi, visus. How do I translate the past participle? I translate it passively. Seen or having been seen. Now I've got these active endings. How do I translate that? They were seeing. How do I then translate these passive endings? They were being seen. Videbantur, they were being seen.